A proposed Greek debt swap plan calms markets on hopes of a breakthrough between Athens and its official creditors. The UN condemns fighting tactics in Ukraine as the death toll continues to rise. And the UN court clears Serbia and Croatia of genocide in the 1990s wars. Hello and welcome to Aletejah European Bulletin, coming to you live from London. The new government in Greece is now proposing to swap debts for growth-linked bonds instead of a debt write-off, in a move to win over private investors and reassure Brussels of its commitment to staying within the Eurozone. More details in this report.
Greece's new government has a new economic proposal to present to Brussels. News of the plan has already caused Greece's stock markets to surge by 7% this morning, as default fears receded. The trigger for the rally came last night after Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis told City investors that he hopes to swap existing debt for new bonds linked to Greek growth.
There is no fundamental reason why the banks should have a problem. The only thing that we need to do as politicians in Europe is we need to settle everyone's nerves by putting on display a joint commitment to doing our job as politicians, and that is to create the circumstances for stability in the Eurozone. And that, I have absolutely no doubt that we are in the process of doing, and as you will see in the next few hours, days, the whole of Europe is going to bind together and do its job.
Greece's new Prime Minister Aletejah'S and his Finance Minister are on a whistle-stop tour of Europe, which will include Tsipras' meeting with the EU's President Jean-Claude Juncker on Wednesday. It seems Greece has moved away from their initial plan for a debt write-off, showing signs of compromise as they continue trying to renegotiate their bailout deal. Failure to strike a deal with its European creditors by the end of February, when the current bailout expires, risks seeing the European Central Bank pull its support for the Greek banking sector. Today, Aletejah'S is in Italy to find common ground with his Italian counterpart Matteo Renzi, and there is an air of optimism, as Renzi has expressed that he wants to shift the debate from financial policy and austerity to growth and investment. There's also much excitement in Athens today over reports that plans are afoot to dismantle the deeply unpopular troika of auditors from the EU, ECB and IMF. For those looking in, Greece's new government have acted impressively during their short time in office. And it seems there's plenty of optimism around that the two sides will resolve the issue, even though we've not heard anything official from Germany or the European Central Bank about the new debt swap plan.
Bon, merci beaucoup.
Up to 16 civilians have been killed and dozens more injured in the space of 24 hours in fighting in eastern Ukraine. And in the midst of an upsurge in violence, the United Nations has slammed indiscriminate shelling that has led to the death of at least 224 civilians in the past 3 weeks alone. According to the United Nations, the overall death toll rose to a total of more than 5,350 people, with 545 civilians wounded in the past 3 weeks. The UN is now urging both conflicting sides to make the protection of civilians an utmost priority. Now, as the US mulls arming Ukraine against pro-Russian separatists, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that her country would not arm Ukraine to fight pro-Russian separatists. Merkel says that she favors diplomatic solutions to the crisis, which could mean more sanctions against Russia.
Deutschland wird, das habe ich gestern schon gesagt, der Ukraine.
Germany will not send Ukraine any deadly, lethal weapons, as I said yesterday. We are focusing on a diplomatic solution, and the foreign ministers have made it clear that if the situation gets even worse, a qualitatively new situation, then it will be necessary to work on further sanctions.
Dass Arbeiten an weiteren Sanktionen notwendig sein wird.
Now, the International Court of Justice has ruled that Serbia and Croatia did not commit acts of genocide against each other during the Croatian War of Secession from Yugoslavia between 1991 and 1995. Hassan Al-Khatib has more.
No genocide was the verdict from the International Court of Justice in The Hague earlier today, a verdict that was expected. The Croatian government alleged that Serbia committed genocide in the town of Vukovar and elsewhere in 1991. Serbia later filed a counterclaim over the expulsion of more than 200,000 Serbs from Croatia. However, both claims of genocide were rejected today, citing that neither side provided sufficient evidence to demonstrate the specific intent required for acts of genocide.
The court concludes from the foregoing that Croatia has failed to show that the perpetrators of the acts which form the subject of the principal claim availed themselves of opportunities to destroy a substantial part of the protected group. Finally, the court considers that the series of 17 factors invoked by Croatia do not lead to the conclusion that there was an intent to destroy in whole or in part the Croats in the regions concerned.
Serbia and Croatia were, however, accused of deliberately forcing minority ethnic groups out of areas they controlled. The 1991-95 Balkan War was triggered when Croatia broke away from the former Yugoslav Republic. The Croatian town of Vukovar was devastated when it was occupied by Serbs for 3 months in 1991. Tens of thousands of ethnic Croats were displaced and about 260 Croat men were detained and killed. 4 years later, the Croatian military's Operation Storm bombarded a majority ethnic Serb area, forcing about 200,000 people from their homes. The 16-year-long case has now come to a close, and both sides have said they accept the verdicts.
As new Italian President Sergio Mattarella took his oath of office in Rome, he stated his country needs a concerted drive for economic growth from across Europe to reverse the decades-long decline, which he feels has left it mired in a third recession in 6 years.
My hope is that the Italian people may confidently see their faces reflected in public offices and institutions. The serene faces of children, the curious faces of the young, the worried faces of the elderly, lonely and troubled, the faces of those who suffer, of the sick and of their families that carry heavy burdens on their shoulders, the faces of those who are looking for a job and of those who have lost their job, the faces of those who have had to close their businesses down due to the economic crisis, and the faces of those who keep investing despite the economic crisis.
You're watching Aletejah European Bulletin, still to come. Oil prices are up by more than 11% in just 2 days, so has the falling cost of crude ended? More on that after the break. Welcome back. A reminder of the main headlines. A proposed Greek debt swap plan calms markets on hopes of a breakthrough between Athens and its official creditors. The UN condemns fighting tactics in Ukraine as the death toll continues to rise. And the UN court clears Serbia and Croatia of genocide in the 1990s wars. Oil futures are rising, adding to gains of over 11% in the previous two sessions as British Petroleum slashed capital expenditure for 2015. BP declared it would reduce capital expenditure by 13% to $20 billion in 2015, and last week Chevron indicated a 13% cut in capital expenditures to $35 billion. The announcement of major oil companies to cut capital expenditures has helped boost oil prices that have fallen more than 50% over the last 6 months. In the past couple of days, prices jumped after data showed the number of US oil drilling rigs had plunged the most in a week in nearly 30 years. Joining us via Skype is economic expert Rodney Shakespeare. Now, Rodney, we know that oil prices have gone up 11% in the last 2 days. Is this the end of the slump in the oil price?
It could be. Oil prices have more than halved over the last few months. And that wasn't due to the ferries. It was really due to a great pullback in global demand because the debt has built up in country after country to be unrepayable. Rich-poor division has increased, and the way they work things, they don't put the money supply into creating jobs for people. So the whole thing's going down. And the Saudis saw their chance. They thought they would be clever and that they would be able to drop the price by keeping their output up, and in doing that, hit Russia, hit Iran, and smash the American fracking industry. But what's happened in the last few weeks is that arms are being twisted, and the Americans are furious at the loss of their industry, and big oil generally is also furious at the sudden collapse. The pressure is now on Saudi Arabia in particular to restrain its output and to get prices back. So even though there's a big collapse in global demand, I think the thing has gone down far enough and that the arms are being twisted, favors are being recalled, and one way or another, the pressure is on now to get the oil price at least stabilized and possibly up to roughly where it is now.
So what impact, Rodney, do you think that this will have on global markets?
The global markets always believe that everything is right and they just cling on and it will come back again. For example, at the moment they're all crowing. They think that the European situation with Greece has been solved and nothing of the sort has actually happened. So they're all short-term thinkers with the existing mindset which says that everything is basically okay. So the markets will be taking heart from the Greek situation, basically delaying the repayment of debt forever, and taking heart from where the arms are being twisted in the oil market. From my point of view, and I'm sure it's the reality for most people, the problems have not been solved, and we're now looking at another part of a great global downturn, which is probably going to continue for many years.
Now, we know that a lot of movement in the oil price has been influenced by speculation on the market. How significant will this be in the long term?
Well, there's always speculation on the markets. And whatever it's moving one way or the other, it moves up or it moves down, according to those who are just trying to make money, and they're influenced by short-term markets. But the speculators had better watch it. They think it's going up again, but no, the realities are of that great pullback in demand. So my guess is that things are going to stay very roughly where they are for quite a long time.
Now, we know that BP has cut its expenditure. What impact will that have?
Well, of course, it's not just BP, it's Shell, it's every production company, and it's other countries in the OPEC which are losing out because prices have gone down too low. And what do you think is happening to the American fracking industry, whether you agree with it or not? the price has gone down such that the American fracking industry is being wiped out. And therefore all countries, with the exception perhaps of Saudi Arabia, will be putting the pressure on behind the scenes on Saudi Arabia. And so I think for that reason that the oil price is not going to go down any lower, because a lot of countries and their big powerful interests are determined that it should not go down any lower.
Now, we know that the Russian economy relies heavily on oil. Now, are they now in the safe zone?
The Russians need a higher price, but all this Western talk about Russia being in trouble, they ought to remember that Russia's government has a very low level of debt. It has the biggest array of primary resources. It has a huge technology, and a bit of pressure on Russia will lead it to start to think for itself and develop its own industries, as it should have started to do a long time ago, in exactly the same way as pressure has done that most successfully for Iran.
Now, going back to BP, its chief executive says that it expects US oil output to rise until this summer and then slump. What do you make of this?
Well, I'm not quite sure what to make of that. They all sort of don't know what's happening, because none of them really understand that this question of the pullback in global demand, you see, it goes against all their macro neoclassical theory, which says that everything is actually perfect. So they're in a bit of a muddle and they're contradicting themselves, but they're going to have to get used to the fact that global demand has pulled back, and that in country after country, the internal economic problems are getting worse.
Rodney Shakespeare, economic expert, thank you very much for joining us today. Austria saw its first Pegida march last night, but it wasn't given too much of a warm welcome. The anti-Islam march was met by more than 10 times the number of people in a counter-protest. The rallies come at a time of rising religious sensibilities in the capital, Vienna. Jasmine Berger has more.
The anti-Islam movement Pegida, which originated in Germany, found itself in Austria last night. In its first march in the capital Vienna, several hundred people took part in the rally, while 5,000 others came out in a counter-demonstration. Fearing confrontation from both sides, some 1,200 police officers were deployed across the Austrian capital. Ranks of police and riot gear separated the two camps.
The politicians should listen more to the Austrian citizens and not to the large number of immigrants who don't want to live according to the Central European culture, but who want to bring their culture into our country.
The Pegida supporters, however, were met with 10 times the number of people in a counter-protest, shouting, "Down with Pegida."
I am trying to block the Pegida march, because there is no room for right-wing ideologies in Vienna. There is no Islamization problem in Austria. And also, I want to stand up against right-wing violence.
Of course I'm against terrorist attacks. I'm a Muslim myself, and Islam is disassociating itself from such acts. Still, this is no reason for a rally like this in a civilized country like Austria. This reminds me of National Socialism, of the Holocaust. I don't want to compare those, but this is anti-Islam agitation.
The march comes after a protest on Friday by leftist activists demonstrating against an annual ball in Vienna that traditionally draws in right-wing figures. Meanwhile, in Frankfurt, about 1,200 demonstrators turned out against 85 representatives of the Frankfurt Rhein-Main Pegida group. But in this city, clashes erupted with demonstrators throwing eggs and scuffling with police. In recent days, Europe has seen a surge in religious sensibilities, and months after the sudden rise of Pegida in Germany, the party seemed to have fallen into disarray, with its founding members dropping out and supporters on the streets dwindling.
During his visit to New Zealand, British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond confirmed his support for the prospect of a trade deal between New Zealand and the European Union and sought its participation in the combat against extremist militants. Hammond expressed his desire for New Zealand to become an active participant in international efforts to fight the extremist ISIL militants in Iraq.
We exchanged views on a number of these pressing global security challenges and talked about how we can work together to counter the threat from ISIL in Iraq and Syria and the threat from extremist militant Islamism around the world, wherever it shows its face.
The widow of Alexander Litvinenko arrived at London's High Court today ahead of her second day of evidence to a public inquiry into the former KGB spy's death. Marina Litvinenko on Monday stated that her husband believed Russian President Vladimir Putin lacked the mettle to stamp out corruption in Russia's security agency. Litvinenko was poisoned with polonium, which British police believed he was given by 2 Russian spies. Now, Britain could become the first country to legalise the making of babies using DNA from 3 different people. MPs are set to hold a crucial vote later today on whether they allow the practice to go ahead. The technique intends to avoid fatal genetic diseases being passed from mother to child and is said to possibly help about 150 couples a year. But it sparked fierce ethical debate, and senior church figures have called for the procedure to be blocked. However, if there is a yes vote in Parliament, then the first 3-person baby could be born as soon as next year. Eurozone factory activity grew slightly last month as companies kept slashing prices, but a weakened currency did little to help drive new orders from abroad.
An underwhelming start to the year for Eurozone manufacturing. While factory activity grew slightly in January, the pace of expansion remained sluggish. The final Purchasing Managers' Index for the region came in at 51, just above the 50 figure that separates growth from contraction. That's even as companies slashed prices and the euro weakened.
The simple problem is just getting sustainable growth, and that will continue to be an issue, and having a monetary policy which is suiting some, i.e. Germany, even they're slowing, but also the others, the periphery, which are struggling because of the inability in a monetary union to have an independent monetary policy, inflate your way out, or have a devaluation.
Even Eurozone's powerhouse economy, Germany, saw its manufacturing sector dampened by slower job creation and cooling exports. And France's factory output shrank for a 9th month. Most of the survey's results were collected before the ECB announced its multi-billion euro bond buying plan. But there's some skepticism as to whether the central bank's bazooka of QE will make much of an impact.
Even though it was larger than expected in terms of its size, but it's coming in late in the day, bond yields are already low, and the whole mechanisms by which it works through government bond markets and also credit markets is very different to what you've seen in the UK and US.
No doubt analysts will be paying closer attention to February's numbers to see if QE and lower oil prices are enough to inject a dose of all too elusive growth.
Heavy rain has caused extreme flooding in Greece, Albania and the former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia. A state of emergency was declared in the east of the former Macedonia and parts of northern and central Greece, where the 19th century Plaka bridge collapsed over the weekend due to raging floodwaters. In one area, soldiers were deployed in to help farmers and to shore up defences after rivers burst their banks. So far, there have been no casualties reported. Madrid swaps its streetlight system with LED technology in the largest urban street lighting replacement plan in the world. A new project that hopes to save 36% of annual energy consumption.
Out with the old and in with the new. Madrid is lighting up its streets using brighter, energy-saving LED technology. As part of a new energy-saving plan, the city aims to replace a total of 225,000 streetlight bulbs, saving 36% of annual energy consumption. The goal is not only to reduce the cost of electricity, but the City Council's public lighting head, Gemma Gallego, says the reduction is equal to CO2 emissions generated by more than 100,000 vehicles a year.
La eficacia de los dispositivos LED puede ser equiparable.
The efficiency of an LED device is comparable to the efficiency offered by sodium vapor light sources. And they also have a longer life, over 50,000 hours, which reduces their maintenance costs.
Repercute en una reducción de los gastos de mantenimiento.
The ambitious plan will cost Madrid more than $160 million, but is expected to save around $130 million over the next 8 years. The Spanish capital has pioneered energy-saving public lighting, replacing street lights in 1968 with high-pressure sodium vapor lighting, and it tested LED technology in traffic lights in 2004.
And now a reminder of the main headlines. A proposed Greek debt swap plan calms markets on hopes of a breakthrough between Athens and its official creditors. The UN condemns fighting tactics in Ukraine as the death toll continues to rise. And the UN court clears Serbia and Croatia of genocide in the 1990s wars. That's all we have time for today. Please join us again. Goodbye.